Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to LIBOR's Wednesday webinar. I'm Mary Ann Monteleone, and Director of Education, and I'm so happy to have with us our friend, fellow colleague, fellow staffer, but at NYSAR, Mike Kelly. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Marion. How are you?
I'm great. I don't want to be remiss in leaving anything out, so please excuse while I read your bio formally and then welcome you as a friend of LIBOR. So Mike Kelly, prior to joining the Realtor family in 2001, Mike worked for 8 years in the New York State Senate Assembly, directing communication efforts for several assembly members, worked on multiple political campaigns, and served as staff on the Ways and Means Committee. Mike became NYSAR's Director of Government Affairs in 2008. The NYSAR Government Affairs Department helps formulate and implement the association's legislative and political agenda and oversees the Realtors Political Action Committee, RPAC, issues mobilization fund, and the association's independent expenditure efforts in support of realtor-friendly candidates for public office. The department is also responsible for assisting local boards in achieving their political and legislative goals. Mike is a proud graduate of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and lives outside of Albany, New York with his wife, Beth. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Marianne. I appreciate it. It's funny, as you read that, I was reminded that I spent 8, I don't know if I'd call them fantastic. We'll just say they were 8 weeks in Patchogue, New York, in 1994, around the time when you'll remember Governor Mario Cuomo was running for re-election, and there was a certain amount of Democratic fatigue in the state. It was a much different state politically than it is now. And I was working on behalf of a Democrat named Bill Bianchi. And Bill Bianchi, albeit absent the best of our efforts, lost. And there was a Republican wave that year. I think Republicans in New York, I think, are hoping for the same thing. I will tell you, I don't think Patchogue is anywhere like it was then in 1994. I think it's much different. I actually haven't been back, but I've heard that community's completely turned around and it's a terrific place to live now.
You have to come back for a visit. Yeah.
I will say I ate 3 square meals a day on the campaign at a place called the Milk Depot. And I quickly ballooned from about 180 to 205 in a span of 8 weeks. So,
that'll do it.
Although the candidate lost, I gained a lot of weight. So there's my story. So yeah, I've been with the association now for just about 21 years, and I've had the terrific opportunity to work with LIBOR and its members and its staff over that time. Obviously, many of you still remember Randy Kaplan, and now I have the pleasure of serving with Marlo on, as well as you, Marianne, on LIBOR staff, and it's been a pleasure, and I'm certain that's going to continue. So with that, let me my plan today is to talk a little bit about NYSAR's legislative priorities, some of the things that I'm concerned with presently, as well as some of the issues that I see us facing and some significant headwinds on some issues moving forward on the legislative front. But I think before that, I think it's always important to remember and take a step back and get a perspective of where we are politically, because for better or for worse, and I know a lot of our members don't like politics, just a lot of people generally don't like politics. They don't want to be engaged in it. But in New York State, and I'm certain every other state in our union, politics drives a lot of what we face, and particularly in the kind of government affairs legislative arena. So the biggest thing I want to leave you is New York is a blue state, and it's trending bluer every 2 years. There's been a tremendous uptick in the number of Democrats that are enrolling in that party, number of people, I should say, enrolling in the Democratic Party, far outpacing their Republican counterparts. Redistricting this year, there were new maps, new districts. There were a lot more competitive districts, especially after those initial lines that were drafted by Democrats were challenged in court. the courts held that they were not bipartisan enough, that they were too gerrymandered, sent them back for a redraft. And those new maps, I think, are providing a lot of people with some angst, in particular on the Democratic side of the aisle, because I think there will be some more races that are going to be competitive and more small d Democratic than they were initially. But I want to be careful here, and I let you know that my estimation is, we all see the headlines that there's going to be a red wave across the country, that Republicans are going to retake the House, and my guess is they probably will, and I'll talk about that in a second. But in New York, remember, we, to a certain extent, live in a little blue bubble, and it's hard to, I think it's important to remember that as we, have these conversations about what we're facing politically and legislatively. So far this year, we've had multiple elections. On June 28th, we had a primary for governor, lieutenant governor in the New York State Assembly. Not surprisingly, Governor Hochul, Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado easily won that primary over their Democratic challengers. And the only takeaway I think that I saw from New York State Assembly primaries back in June was the fact that once again, there were several seats that fell into the hands of Democratic socialists. So those inroads continue to be made by Democratic socialists, particularly in the Hudson Valley and parts of New York City, and particularly Queens, where there was another Democratic socialist that won a Queens, New York State Senate seat as well. On Tuesday, August 23rd, there were 26 elections for U.S. House of Representatives. We're down one seat after the census. We lost another congressional seat, down from 27 to 26. And then there were also primaries for the New York State Senate. The general elections are coming up very, very quickly. We're a little over, let me clarify that. We're about 4 weeks away from last Tuesday or yesterday. Governor Hochul and Antonio Delgado are going to be facing challengers, Republicans Lee Zeldin, congressman from the East End of Long Island, and Allison Esposito, his running mate for lieutenant governor. And Ms. Esposito is a former New York City police officer. It looks to continue to be a contested race, although I saw recent polling that came out from Siena College about 10 days ago that saw Governor Hochul and Mr. Delgado up by a 17-point margin. I don't think it's going to be that far of a divide at the end of the day. I can't imagine that, but I think at this point, Governor Hochul looks to be on her way to her first election. Remember, she was replacing former Governor Andrew Cuomo. In the House, a lot of pundits across the country are looking at New York as possibly the deciding factor of who controls the U.S. House of Representatives next year. You'll remember that Republicans only need to take 5 seats to take control from Democrats in the U.S. House. And there are certainly a handful of races to watch in upstate New York, in particular the Hudson Valley, but as well as 3 U.S. House seats in and on Long Island. The first being New York's 1st congressional district. This is the race to replace Lee Zeldin. Democrat Bridget Fleming is running against Republican Nick LaLota. Right now, Mr. LaLota looks to be the favorite. Cook Report has that race as a lean Republican. New York's 3rd congressional district. This is a race to replace Tom Suozzi, who I'm not certain exactly why Mr. Suozzi left the House. Maybe he saw the writing on the wall that the majority was going to go the way of Republicans in the next cycle. And, I think Mr. Suozzi wanted to run for governor. He was running with the best intentions. Unfortunately, he came up short in that Democratic primary against Kathy Hochul. This race is a race between Democrat Robert Zimmerman and Republican George Santos. And that race is a lean Democratic district at this point. In New York's 4th congressional district, this is a race to replace Kathleen Rice, who's resigning as well. Democrat Laura Gillen is going to be facing Republican Anthony D'Esposito, and that seat and race is called as a likely Democratic seat in favor of Democrat Laura Gillen. In the New York State Senate, all 63 seats are up for re-election. Democrats currently hold a 43-20 advantage in the New York State Senate. I don't expect that to change significantly. I think Republicans obviously are trying to make inroads to tighten that margin up, to take away that supermajority that Democrats have right now. I think the question whether the Republicans do make inroads really comes down to, do Republicans make inroads on Long Island? And I think some of the seats and races to watch here is the race to replace State Senator Todd Kaminsky. And in that race, you have Malvern trustee Patricia Fitzpatrick, a Republican, running against Belrose Mayor Ken Moore, the Democrat. In the 4th State Senate District in Suffolk County, you have a race to replace outgoing and retiring Republican Phil Boyle. This race pits a former state senator, Monica Martinez, who lost 2 years ago, now running for re-election in a new district against Republican Wendy Rodriguez, who actually is a Realtor member as well. In the 5th Senate District, incumbent Democrat John Brooks, State Senator John Brooks, is running for political survival in Nassau County against Nassau County legislator Steve Rhodes. The interesting thing there is they're both volunteer firefighters as well. So Mr. Rhodes is, I think, looking to unseat the current incumbent John Brooks in that seat. In the 7th Senate District, incumbent Democrat Senator Anna Kaplan running in a highly contested race as well against former state senator Republican Jack Martins. In the assembly, all 150 assembly seats are up for grabs. Right now, it is 107 Democrats. Again, another supermajority in that House to 43 Republicans. The outcome of the political power in that House is highly unlikely to change. Maybe Republicans make slight inroads into that, but possibly not as well. Again, I think for Republicans, I think there may be some inroads in both houses. Maybe they take 1 or 2 seats in the Senate. Same case for the Assembly, but I don't expect political power or control of either house to change after the next, November 8th. So how does NYSAR get involved? Well, we get involved a couple different ways. One way is via support for candidates and committees through the Realtors Political Action Committee. LIBOR is a tremendous supporter of RPAC, has been since I've been here in my 21 years here with NYSAR. And we get engaged. So the RPAC trustees, group of realtors from across the state, meet to determine who we're going to be supportive of in a lot of these open races that I just touched on. They've met several times already, had multiple hour-long conversations about some of these highly contested ones. We do outside polling to help us make those determinations. And then secondly, we get involved in what are known as independent expenditures. And these are campaign efforts that NYSAR gets involved in when we want to go beyond just a RPAC contribution to a candidate that we think needs our help, that is in a tight race, that we think is supportive of our issues and will be moving forward as well. And so what we've been doing more recently in our independent expenditure efforts, we've been focusing our attention on the state Senate, because that's a place where we can continue to make a difference to support folks on both sides of the aisle that are supportive of our realtor perspective on issues, regardless if they're Democrats or Republicans. And once again, we're going to be getting engaged in multiple independent expenditure efforts in support of these candidates. So these are campaigns that we don't legally, we're not allowed to have any coordination with the candidate themselves. We don't have any communication efforts. They are truly independent. And we expend NYSAR resources in support of those candidates' reelection. So it's kind of like RPAC, but on steroids in our efforts. We typically get involved with somewhere between 4 and 6, and that will probably be the case once again in this election cycle. And you'll see, hopefully, some of those efforts in the coming weeks in support. The one thing I do want to note is we don't go negative. NYSAR's independent expenditure efforts, we don't do attack ads. We don't, leaves a little bad taste in our realtor members' mouth. We stay positive for the candidates that we're supporting. And also importantly to know, we stay true to realtor issues. We don't incorporate a candidate's perspective on choice or guns or other things that are not real estate related in making those campaign decisions, whether it's related to an IE or just RPAC generally. So I think with that, I know that Marianne, I know Ethan had mentioned that folks may have questions. I'm not certain. I can't see the chat. So I don't know if people have any questions about that. And if not, I'll turn to kind of our legislative priorities this year.
We're good. No questions yet.
Okay, terrific. Let me take a quick sip here. I apologize if my voice is cracking a little bit. Marianne had mentioned I went to University of Nebraska and I had the opportunity to go see Nebraska play out east, which doesn't happen that often. So Nebraska played Rutgers last Friday night. I'm happy to report we won by 1 point in a very close game. But in the process, I lost my voice for about 3 days. So I'm on the mend and it's coming back. So in terms of our legislative priorities, with that political background before you and recognition that we're an all blue state, whether it's statewide office, governor, lieutenant governor, controller, attorney general, as well as super majorities controlled by Democrats in both houses. Let's turn to our priorities in 2022 and beyond. So as you all know, we as I think an industry, as realtor associations have been challenged with, I think, some really, really important issues related to fair housing over the past couple of years. There were multiple bills. I think there were upwards of 21 bills that were introduced in one or both houses back in 2020 that, passed 8 of them. 8 of those 21 passed both houses in 2021. Multiple bills out of those 8 needed some technical fixes, some amendments, and at the end of the day, some improvements. And that's where NYSAR got involved, trying to make them more palatable in terms of the real world, how our members would adhere to some of those proposals and regulations before them. Not surprisingly, lawmakers want to get on top of issues, want to get out in front of them, want to be in the media, out in front of these, I think, hot button issues. And sometimes they go maybe too quickly, and the legislation may not exactly work in the real world. And I think that's where NYSAR got involved over the past couple of years, trying to make these bills work a little bit better in the real world. Do they see, did those bills have all of, I think, the recommended changes that NYSAR wanted? Absolutely not. Did it include some of them? Yes, it did. And do I think there are better bills than were passed originally in 2021? Yes, I believe so. While I don't see fair housing bills in particular coming out of the legislature in 2023 in the next cycle, there may be some, but I don't think the focus moving forward is going to be on real estate specifically. I think more so you're going to see the legislature focusing its attention on fair housing as it relates in the real estate space to the lending side, and I think to the appraisal side. Some of you probably have seen stories about disparate appraisals coming forth from the same house, or the same type of house, the same square footage, the same community, and one appraisal being far less when a minority family might own it as compared to, let's say, a white family. So when you see those types of news stories being released and coming out in the media, what that triggers for me is, well, if I'm seeing it, I most certainly know that a state lawmaker or a lawmaker staff is going to see it and probably want to do something to address it. I haven't seen any bills yet or any state regulations yet, but that is definitely something that we're looking at as well. One issue that we faced also in 2021 and again in 2022 is an issue that traces back to 2019 and the passage of the Tenant Protection Act. You'll remember that 9 of the 10 pillars of the Tenant Protection Act from 2019. This is, remember, the probably the foremost bill that the state legislature passed when Democrats retook the state Senate for the first time back then. And they passed a wide swath of bills strengthening protections for tenants across New York State. The one piece of those proposals that did not get passed by both houses, what's known as the good cause eviction legislation. This is a bill that is opposed by NYSAR. This is a bill that's opposed by other real estate groups like REBNY, CHIP, and RSA. And what the bill does is it puts in statute about 8 reasons that a landlord could evict a tenant, and only those 8 reasons, any of those prescribed reasons. Anything beyond what's prescribed in the bill, that landlord could not evict a tenant, including non-payment of rent by a tenant if the landlord attempts to charge anything beyond 3% or 1.5 times the consumer price index for that region. NYSAR, again, is strongly opposed to the bill. We have a lot of concerns with that. I think backdoor attempt at providing statewide rent control. We have concerns with the bill provisions on and the limitations on the ways that a landlord can evict a tenant. And we also have concerns that this bill, good cause eviction bill, essentially at the end of the day creates a perpetual lease. Remember, if the landlord is dealing with I don't know, cantankerous tenant or someone that's just not friendly to the other tenants in the building, is late with their rent all the time, is more of a nuisance and an annoyance. I'm sorry, but those types of tenants aren't prescribed, or those types of activities aren't prescribed as reasons to evict a tenant. So the landlord would not be able to just let the lease expire and then not renew the lease. The landlord would be required to renew the lease. And it creates essentially at the end of the day, a perpetual lease if the tenant doesn't violate any of the prescribed reasons for eviction in that legislation. So we have been working over the past couple of years with our real estate coalition. In 2022, we were engaged in a statewide $1.4 million campaign targeting lawmakers across the state in opposition to this proposal. The good news is good cause eviction in its current form did not pass either house of the state legislature. Governor Hochul has not expressed support for it, and it did not pass in 2022. I will tell you that the issue at the Albany level, at the statewide level, remains, I think, one of the top issues before state government here in Albany. It was one of our top issues this year, and I fully expect it to be moving forward in 2023 and beyond as well. At the local level, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019 also allows, excuse me, I was getting things confused. I was speaking to rent control on the local level. At the local level, I want to bring to your attention the fact that 5 localities across New York have already approved good cause eviction at the local level, and they include the cities of Albany, Beacon, Newburgh, Kingston, and Poughkeepsie. So what do all five of those communities have in common? Well, they're all in the Hudson Valley geographically. And I think even more importantly is those communities are led by all Democratic leaning municipal governments. So where are we with these local good cause eviction laws? NYSAR was financially supportive of a legal challenge to the city of Albany's good cause eviction law. We filed an amicus brief in opposition, or excuse me, I should say in support of that legal challenge, in siding with the plaintiffs. We've also been financially supportive of the landlord challengers to that Albany city law. The good news is the plaintiffs, the folks that we're supporting, won in round one of that. Albany judge ruled that that law is null and void. Not surprisingly, though, the city of Albany is appealing that decision, and it will go to an appellate court sometime in the early part of 2023. So stay tuned on that. There's also a legal challenge in the city of Newburgh as well, and that case is a little bit behind in the judicial process from where we are in the city of Albany. Parallel to some of these good cause eviction bills dealing with residential property, there's also a New York City, a New York State commercial good cause bill called the Stop the Outrageous Retail Evictions Act. So this bill would impose good cause eviction on commercial properties as well. It's, again, I love these titles: Stop the Outrageous Retail Evictions Act, or STORE Act. That restriction on evictions of smaller tenants, smaller commercial properties of 2,000 square feet or less has also been introduced at the state level. It didn't move in either house this year, but the fact that we have parallel bills on the commercial side, I think raises a lot of red flags for us here in Albany, and we are most certainly going to continue to be opposed to that commercial specific bill as well. The next issue I want to bring to your attention is telemarketing. I'm not certain if many of the folks on this call, Marianne, partake in cold calling or telemarketing. This issue essentially got on our plate when we ran into the COVID state of emergency several years ago. The unfortunate thing is, due to a law that passed both houses in 2019, there is a ban on all cold calling and telemarketing during any state of emergency. So whether it's any current state of emergency or like we have right now. So I think there are 5 of them right now. You've got a state of emergency on gun violence. You've got one on a hospital worker shortage, nursing shortage. You've got one on monkeypox. You have one on polio, I believe. And I believe I'm missing one. But right now, I believe there are 5 states of emergency. Only one of those is needed to trigger this current ban on telemarketing and cold calling. The original intent of state lawmakers in imposing this was to curtail essentially bad actors coming out of states of emergency as we traditionally knew them. So back when we faced the challenges coming out of hurricanes Irene and Sandy, state lawmakers wanted to do something about unscrupulous actors that took advantage of people during and after that state of emergency. So they imposed a ban on cold calling during states of emergency. Fast forward several years to a world and global health pandemic in which Governor Cuomo and then Governor Hochul imposed and extended every month a state of emergency on cold calling, in which there was no harm done to the state's telemarketing or communication systems. That law passed in 2019 prohibits any cold calling during those states of emergency. So the challenge before NYSAR is the fact that in real world terms, we're trying to get a bill done that would bring us back to where we were before, where cold calling could exist after what we know as traditional states of emergency that last somewhere around a month and then would have to be extended. The political challenge before us is the reality that the public, and not surprisingly, state lawmakers aren't in a hurry to provide any relief to telemarketers or folks in the cold calling business, including real estate. So we will be working with a coalition that NYSAR formed of other interested parties, including the New York State Business Council, including the New York State Insurance Association, businesses like Verizon, and individual insurance companies like State Farm and Nationwide and others, to try and get this fix done, to provide that carve out for businesses that have really been harmed, that have cold calling and telemarketing as part of their book of business. So we're going to be working on that once again in 2023. But I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that that type of legislation does not face a significant uphill battle. I think one of the most foremost issues that we are going to be having a conversation about as a state, and I think as a country, is how to deal with climate change. And I'm here to tell you today that state government, New York State government, is moving very fast to address this. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of New Yorkers know this yet. And NYSAR hopes to change that, and I'll get to that in a second. So back in 2019, Governor Cuomo signed into law the CLCPA, or the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. I love these in acronyms. They're the climate. So this all sounds amazing. This is like a lot of bills and laws that we see introduced and passed in Albany here. The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, right? So no harm could be done with that. It sounds like, only we're dancing through tulips there with that new law. So what this bill does, I should say law, let me be clear, it is a law in New York. It sets the state on a path to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by requiring a few things. It requires a 40% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 and an 85% reduction in emissions by 2050. So let me say that again. In just 7 years and a few months, we're going to be required by this law to reduce carbon emissions by 40% from where we are right now. That law also mandates that 70% of the state's energy should come from renewable resources by 2030. So again, in 7.5 years from now, roughly, we are going to have to move from our current renewable energy production, which is we're at 31% of our energy comes from renewable sources. We're going to have to more than double that in the next 7 years from 31% to a state law required 70% of the state's energy is going to have to come from renewable resources. 100% of the state's energy is going to have to come from renewable resources by 2040, meaning that all of our power that we utilize in New York State to run your car, to turn your lights on, to turn your stove on, to put your heat on, to put your air conditioning on in the summer, is going to have to come from a renewable source by 2040. That means that energy is going to come from hydroelectric, wind, solar, and possibly an increase in nuclear production by 2040, 100% by 2040. So that law, the CLCPA, it didn't create a way to get to those goals. It just said you are required, New York State, to reach these lofty, in some respects, I think, very challenging, aspirational goals by 2030, by 2040. and it doesn't create the plan. But what that law does, though, is it directs a group of 22 individuals, known as the Climate Action Council, to develop that roadmap, to come up with that plan on how they're going to reach those goals. So the Climate Action Council has met over the last 18 months, and it has presented its draft scoping plan on how New York State's going to reach those emission standards by 2030 and by 2050. And some of those recommendations include what I'm about to describe to you right now. So this isn't complete, it isn't a complete list of the recommendations. Just some of the highlights, I think, from a real estate perspective, both residential and commercial. So all new construction is going to be all electric beginning January 1st, 2024. All new commercial gas service, there will be no new natural gas hookups to existing buildings immediately. The proposal from the Climate Action Council also recommends the prohibition of propane, natural gas, and oil equipment in new homes in 2024. The Climate Action Council would require a phase-in to electric or geothermal heating systems in existing homes beginning in 2030. So what that means is if your house, like mine, is heated by a natural gas heating source, I have a natural gas furnace. If my furnace goes January 15th in 2030, I would be required to replace it with an electric heat pump or a geothermal heating system. I could not replace it with another natural gas furnace. The draft scoping plan also bans the use of any natural gas appliance, so a dryer, stove, etc., in any home beginning in 2035. So again, if you have a Twin Viking natural gas stove that you love to cook on, and it goes kaput in mid-year 2035, you're going to replace it with a electric stove of some sort if these proposals go into effect. And last, the Climate Action Council draft scoping plan prohibits the sale of gasoline-powered cars in 2035. New York following California's lead on that, and running parallel to this is Governor Hochul just about a month ago announced that the state was going to do this parallel and running at the same time as this Climate Action Council draft scoping plan recommendation. The state, under Governor Hochul's recommendation, would be to do this through regulation as well. That prohibition of the sale of gasoline-powered cars. So a lot to digest there. I think some of the challenges that we face as an association is we're not in a place where we're going to say no, I think, to some of these, I think, aspirational and positive recommendations from Governor Hochul and the Climate Action Council and from some other state lawmakers. But I think while we recognize the need to reduce our carbon footprint, to reduce carbon emissions, the real question is can we do it? Can we reach those goals? And do we have the capability to do it and still have the capability to turn the lights on when we need to, if we're 100% renewable? Right now, for example, I think Iowa leads the nation in renewable energy produced by their state. They have a lot of windmills. So when I drive back from Nebraska to Albany every couple of years, there are countless windmills in Iowa. But the problem is there are times when those windmills aren't running, and the battery capability and storage capability coming off of those windmills can't handle the demand, in particular in winter, for people living in Iowa to heat their homes and turn on the lights. So what do? Well, they have to fire up coal burning plants and natural gas plants as well to do that. So I think there are some challenges both on the cost side that NYSAR has concerns with as it relates to what is the cost of existing and new construction of residential and commercial property. What does that look like under an all green, all renewable energy resource or provider? And what do those appliances look like? What do those heating and cooling systems look like, both from a retrofit perspective as well as a new construction perspective? So NYSAR's been involved in this over the past couple of years. Jennifer Vucetich, NYSAR's president for 2022, has testified multiple times on behalf of NYSAR and its membership this year before the council. We've also provided written testimony, raising, I think, some of the concerns we have with the cost, with reliability, with the grid, with, I think, the impacts that we're going to see on commercial and residential property in New York State. We've also hired an economics firm to help us quantify the cost of this transition away from fossil-based fuels. And we're going to be utilizing that data, not just in the testimony that we've provided so far, but in, I think, some advocacy outreach that we're going to be doing between November 8th of this year, so just after Election Day, and before the end of the year, before the holidays. So we've got about a 7 to 8 week span where NYSAR is going to be getting engaged in really trying to provide information to consumers about some of these questions we have coming out of the Climate Action Council's draft scoping plan. Importantly, you're not going to see a press release from NYSAR saying, NYSAR is opposed to the Climate Action Council's recommendations. That's not where we're at. We're at a place where we think we know where we want to go as a state. We don't disagree with that, but we have questions about what that's going to look like. And I think, what is affordability going to look like for New York residents, and in particular New York businesses, commercial property owners, and residential owners as well. So my hope is in the next 4 months, we're going to be finalizing what that campaign looks like. And I hope that if you were on the call and you're listening to this, that you get to see some of our efforts. You're going to see them on nysar.com, I'm sure, but hopefully you'll see some of our efforts in your inboxes, in your online activity, as we purchase some social media ads and other types of media outreach, trying to, I think, raise the profile of this issue before New Yorkers. Because once again, like I said initially, I think there are a lot of New Yorkers that aren't certain about where we're headed and what this is going to mean for them. So we want to raise that profile. I think looking forward to 2023, and then I'll take any questions you might have. A couple things that are top of mind for our association, our industry, and our members, realtor members. I think we're going to see, again, continued scrutiny in the real estate space as it regards to fair housing, but as I mentioned, particularly on the appraisal and lending side. We're going to be engaged and continue to watch fallout from the Climate Action Council's recommendations. By the way, I might have been remiss in letting you know, the Climate Action Council's draft scoping plan is just draft right now. And it is required to provide that roadmap to the governor and to the legislature before the end of this calendar year. And then what the governor and legislature do with it from there, what do they do with those recommendations? I think that's still to be determined. Another challenge I think that we face from a 10,000 foot perspective is the issue of housing and housing affordability. And what does that look like? What does state government do to try and address that? Every single day I open the paper up, I see stories about, high rent or the high cost of housing. And now, the 30-year fixed is at 6+%. And again, pricing people out of the marketplace. I think with these challenges, I think the question is, what does state government do and what does our federal government do to incentivize that? Does state government come back in 2023 and do they provide another incentive to build more affordable housing in New York City, like the 421A program? does anything come out of the state's Affordable Housing Commission that it's going to be convening between now and the end of the year? I'm not certain, but I most certainly know that we have a tremendous shortage of rental properties. We have a tremendous shortage of affordable housing in New York State, and it's something that we desperately need to address as well. I had mentioned good cause eviction before. It will be back. You know, tenant advocates, tenant lobbyists, and tenants themselves will be protesting out in front of state lawmakers' homes once again. They'll be protesting state lawmakers' offices to pass good cause eviction. It's an issue before voters this year in that it's top of mind for candidates running. And that's why NYSAR is strongly supporting candidates that oppose good cause eviction. We'll also be engaging and continue to engage in those lawsuits against municipal good cause eviction in Albany, Newburgh, and hopefully more, trying to roll those local laws back. One issue that I didn't talk about yet is rent control. Just so you know, any city, town, or village in the state can approve rent control if it holds a public hearing, has a vacancy rate of 5% or less in that community, and they pass a local law. So not a very high barrier to pass rent control at either, let's say Suffolk County, Nassau County, or any municipality within those counties. All you would have to do is those three things that I mentioned, where you all could be facing rent control at the local level. So that's something we're continuing to engage in. Right now, only one municipality outside of the city of New York has passed it, and that is the city of Kingston, who just several months ago passed rent control. They had a vacancy rate of 2%. It is it's led by a Democratic mayor and an all Democratic city council, and so not surprisingly, with renters making up about 70% of the city of Kingston, that local law passed by a wide margin. Importantly, I will tell you that those rent control proposals don't require voter approval. All it has to do is pass the city council, the town board, or the village board as well. We will be once again at NYSAR introducing our first-time homebuyer savings bill that had strong bipartisan support, across the aisle support in both houses, passed several years ago by both houses, got to Governor Cuomo's desk and was vetoed. And we're going to be renewing and doubling down on those efforts to come back with a new revised bill, trying to address, like I mentioned, that affordable housing issue, encouraging people to start saving for the purchase of their first home, as folks face headwinds and challenges to do that in New York. And then that telemarketing ban fix that I mentioned earlier, we're going to be efforting to get that done. I think some political questions. Who's the governor of New York State in 2023? I think we'll have to see after November 8th. And what is the partisan makeup of the state Senate and state assembly? My guess is the state assembly doesn't change much. And if I were a betting person today, I would expect Senate Republicans to take a couple seats, but not change the Democratic majority of the state Senate. So with that, Marianne, I'm happy to answer any questions over any of the issues I talked about or any other ones that the members want to discuss.
Sure. We have so many people who are saying this is a lot of information. Can we get the recording? And absolutely. And we, I think Ethan put the address in there, lirealtor.com/education/Wednesday webinars, or lirealtor.com/Wednesday-webinars. And Mike was kind enough to allow us to record this, and we'll have it up there in a day. We do have one question. How as a realtor group would we support a candidate other than through messages, through marketing? What platforms such as social media and postings are used?
Right. So we use, in our independent expenditure efforts, we use social media as a tool. I think the challenge is New York the challenge before us is whether it's RPAC or our involvement in races. New York is a very litigious state in that it curbs or restricts the ability of our association to directly get involved with those outside of RPAC or outside of independent expenditures. So how can Realtor members themselves be supportive of a candidate? I think that's an interesting one. If you were to solely look at a candidate on real estate specific issues, I'm more than happy to give you guidance on that. But I'm sure, Marianne, you're not going to be surprised to hear that Realtors, just like the rest of Americans, vote on candidates beyond just real estate issues. We are supportive of candidates that are supportive of our real estate issues, and in particular, we are supportive these days of candidates that are in line with our thinking on things like some of the climate challenges that we face and good cause eviction, rent control, taxation on real estate, property taxes, et cetera. So I think you as individuals are more than welcome to be supportive, and you can do that on your own. Just the challenge I have here at the association level is we don't endorse candidates because there are a lot of pitfalls in endorsing candidates in New York State, but we do at the NYSAR level support candidates via RPAC and in some cases via independent expenditures.
Let's see.
And Marlo just posted in the
Yes.
chat, how can you support a candidate? And she's absolutely right. I think the most important thing to do is vote, right? So I will never prescribe who I would ask you to vote for. But most importantly is to vote, because the more realtors vote, it only enhances and increases our political viability and in political importance, I think, before state lawmakers. So yes, I would 100% agree with Marlo. Go vote. And don't ever think that your vote doesn't count. There are so many races where it's really come down to a handful of voters. And I'm not talking about, village trustee or dog catcher votes. I'm talking about state senator, state assembly races. Your vote does matter and it really does count.
And I'm just putting in the easy website to get this recording and all others, free to LIBOR members. It's just because so many are asking. It's lirealtor.com/Wednesday webinar. So I think that's about it. I'm looking. I think that's it, Mike. Thank you.
All right, Mary.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so much for the time. I appreciate it. Good to
Yeah.
be with everybody.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a good day.